name is Dave Fraley. On July 13th, the Department of War issued an announcement and also issued an RFI about changing the CMMC program. I'd like to talk about that, start off just a little bit of background on me. I'm the founder and CTO of Secure IT Service Management. We're founded in 2019. We're a division of a larger cybersecurity vendor that my wife and I own. My personal background includes I'm a retired U.S. Army signal officer, 25 years in uniform, 20 years in DoD contracting. I focus primarily on IT and cybersecurity, a couple of degrees and 3 certs. About SecureITSM, we provide full IT managed services. So the help desk, everything, configure your environment, all of the continuous monitoring, everything that you need, and we do CMC compliance support. We exclusively support DoD contractors that must be CMMC compliant. We've successfully undergone a level 2 CMMC certification, received a score of 110 out of 110 points. Okay, point 1. Never back down on requiring 800-171 for all vendors. I mean, in my limited experience and exposure, and granted, I've only seen a tiny percent of the 100,000 plus companies that are going to need to become compliant with 800-171. But across my limited exposure, which is still pretty broad, the vast majority of scores submitted to SPRS are profoundly overinflated. A great example is the recent LogZone settlement. LogZone was saying that they had a score of 110. DIBCAT came in and did an assessment on them, found them to be actually a minus 173. I mean, probably the only thing they did is turn on multi-factor authentication and maybe a couple of other items, and that's the only thing they had done, right? I've not seen any vendor that whether they're a customer or not before we brought them in, that they actually had a score that was positive, right? System security plans, right? They're either a fictional document or don't exist, barely started, right? It's shocking how many organizations don't have a system security plan. But continuous monitoring is rare. Continuous what? They just don't do it. And there's shocking cybersecurity lapses across the DIB. I've seen so many things that just are no MFA. Okay, MFA you do everywhere, right? MFA everything everywhere, right? Shared email, shared Gmail, AOL, Hotmail, etc. type accounts being shared across multiple parties. Who does that, right? It's not secure. So this, granted, my exposure, the companies that are, doing pretty well on it, they're not going to come to an organization like me. They're going to say, well, we can go ahead and finish it ourselves, right? And just to be clear, once we bring them in, our goal is that they're an honest, 110 points. Even so far as turning on FIPS and, you doing all the tools and all the continuous monitoring. We have that all built into our program. Point 2. Let's start requiring that system security plans be uploaded to SPRS when you go and do a CMMC self-assessment. This is under the CMMC tab. So you go through, you do all your family analysis, you get to the SI, you click that one, and you say, okay, now we're going to go, and the next step is you have to upload a fully compliant system security plan, right? This would be really easy within the 60-day window that the DoW RFI talks about. What policy steps could they do? What could they do quickly, right? Well, let's just have vendors start submitting an SSP. Now we've got all these SSPs, over the next 6 months, you probably have 50,000 or more SSPs in there. Well, what else can we do? Well, let's AI enable SPRS to review the system security plans, right? This would be pretty straightforward. You go in, the contractor uploads the system security plan, and then AI takes over. A compliance engine goes in and looks at it, a certain checklist. It's pretty, this is fairly well understood what needs to be done. Not, by those that are actually knowing, right? The C3 PAOs, they all have a pretty reasonably standardized approach, and this could easily be committed in a AI review. The AI could also have a risk engine. Does this system security plan have risk? They could even go as far as to look at the type of contracts you have, and that could possibly guide the AI engine, right? Automated findings, it could tell you about missing controls, implementation statements. You haven't your documentation's not fully done, right? Do you have evidentiary artifacts? Clarification questions. This is all be automated. The IRS does this today. They go through, they take your tax return and says, hey, you forgot this. This W-2 wasn't filed or whatever it is that you didn't do. That's all automated, right? This can be done on the system security plan. So you email it out to the DIB member. The DIB member re-uploads it into SPRS, and the whole process starts over. And at some point, you're going to get an AI validated SSP. Not the same level as the C3 PAO assessment, but it's a good start, right? At least you know that somebody has documented all 320 AOs, that the implementation statements seem reasonable, and they have enough evidence to give you some confidence that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. Point 4, let's let the KOs decide when a CMMC certification is required. For simple contracts, I think self-attestation and an AI validated SSP should be sufficient. I've got several customers that they're anticipating going through an assessment or were, but I had a conversation with one just very recently. It's like, look at the type of contracts we have. It is, in my opinion, I'm not a KO, but in my opinion, they are exceptionally low risk. Right. So, do they really need to go through a certification? Let the KO decide. They carry a warrant. They're trained, right? They don't need to be cyber experts, but they can look at a contract and use a little bit of common sense. So for simple self-attestation and AI vetted SSPs is fine. For moderate complexity, let's make an evaluation criteria, factor X in the evaluation criteria, CMMC compliance. If you have an AI validated SSP, you get a limited confidence or a partial score, depending on how it's developed. However, if you have a C3 PAO cert, you get a high confidence or a full score. It now becomes a business decision, right? And then for high risk, complex contracts, sensitive acquisitions, if it's a weapons system, come on, guys, you're going to need, if you're going to play in that arena, you need a CMMC certification, right? So, by doing this, becoming CMMC certified would become a business decision, not a compliance mandate, right? It would help either expand or maintain the small business pool for the Department of War and their small business requirements and the ability to protect the government in high risk acquisitions, right? So I think the KOs, a little bit of common sense. They don't need to be cyber experts, but a weapon system, that's kind of a no-brainer. If it's somewhere in the gray area, just make an evaluation criteria, right? Point 4, let's loosen up CMMC assessment scoring. Basically, a CMMC assessment's a no-fail. I know that you can have POAMs on one-point controls, but one-point controls are the easiest often to implement, right? The 3 and 5-point controls, where 62% of all the AOs, and you fail one AO, you fail that control, don't allow POAM. And they're the hardest to implement, right? So you get to a point where you can't, you have to be almost perfect when you go through. I think it'd be a lot better to allow POAMs for 3 and 5-point controls. Let's put some limit. You can't POAM everything, right? But maybe 20 or 25, or I don't know. There could be working groups and some smart people to think about this. But let's allow even 3 and 5-pointers, or maybe up to 10 5-pointers, 3 or 5-pointers, and then an unlimited number of 1-pointers. I don't know what the mixture is, but let's take it out of the no fail, right? If you look at the table at the top left of this slide, if you look over on the 1 pointers, 38% of all AOs, it's 122 AOs, but 51 controls. Almost half the controls don't have many AOs because they're simple, right? And you get a poem on those. I do recommend that 13.12.4, which is this SSP requirement, continue to remain automatic failure. If you haven't documented your system security plan, you haven't done your security. If you can't write it down and document it, it's not done. Point 5, technical recommendations. 1, waiver FIPS. 0.5a, waiver FIPS, right? You can get good cryptography without FIPS. It does add value, but it does significantly limit the tools that you can use, right? When we were implementing FIPS and going through getting ready for our CMMC certification process, we turned on FIPS mode on our Win 11 devices, and all of a sudden our remote management maintenance tool, RMM tool, it quit working. Wouldn't do patches. It was, we got to look at it and it just stopped working, right? And the vendor said it was FIPS enabled, but it was only partially FIPS enabled. And whatever we had done, I think the vendor was being optimistic about being FIPS. So we had to go get a new tool, right? So waiver FIPS, it very small percentage. I'm not saying don't have good cryptography, don't have approved cryptography. You still need to be secure, but FIPS is, I think, a little overkill. Maybe make it part of 801.72, right? The more complex ones. Revision 3 of 801.71. It's significantly more complex. You look at the number of AOs, it goes from 320 to 422. It also has 88 organizationally defined parameters. Look at the parameter on the right. There's 20 different elements, different types of log files that need to be captured for 331, right? I mean, you're getting into some very complex stuff. Your logs storage file space requirements is going to grow. There's got to be a way to simplify Rev 3, right? I understand that Rev 2 it's getting antiquated. It needs some updating, but instead of making it bigger and more aggressive, couldn't we make it a little simpler, right? There should be ways to do this. Anyway, so this is my thoughts and recommendations on how to improve the CMMC program. Leave your thoughts and comments below. Everybody have a great day. Be safe, be secure.